He told her he wished he could hate her, and for a moment, she believed he would walk away. But love doesn't always leave, even when it's broken. Because that same night, he came back. She wasn't supposed to win that case. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. The defendant, a 23-year-old kid who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had the misfortune of looking guilty, knew it most of all. But Seraphine Caldwell had never once in her career walked into a room she wasn't prepared to turn upside down. She won. She was packing her files when she felt his presence. Years in courtrooms had taught her that looking up too fast told people they had power over your attention. But then the bailiff near the door straightened almost imperceptibly, and the two junior associates behind her went very quiet, and Seraphine looked up. The man standing just inside the courtroom doors was tall. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. More like the look of a person who has just watched something they didn't expect to be remarkable turn out to be extraordinary. He held her gaze for a beat longer than was strictly polite. Then he walked toward her. She set down her files. "Miss Caldwell," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. That was one of the finest closing arguments I've ever witnessed. She looked at him steadily. "Thank you," she said. "And you are?" "Evander Holt." He offered his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief, and he let go exactly when he should have. And yet somehow, for just a fraction of a second, she was aware of the specific warmth of his hand against hers, in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "I know who you are," she said, because she did. Everyone in this city with a business section subscription knew who Evander Holt was. "What I don't know is what brings you to a municipal courtroom on a Tuesday afternoon." "Curiosity," he said simply. "I was told you were worth watching." She tilted her head slightly. "And they undersold it," he said. He left before she could respond. She watched the doors settle closed behind him. She became aware slowly that she had not moved. She picked up her files. Theo, her longtime friend, was leaning against the corridor wall outside, coffee in hand, grinning at her with the particular grin of a man who had seen everything through the small window in the courtroom door. "That was Evander Holt," Theo said before she could speak. "I know who it was. He watched your entire closing." Seraphine accepted the coffee he offered and started walking. "Tell me something I don't know about him," she said, because it was easier than acknowledging the warmth that had not entirely left her hand. Theo fell into step beside her. He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she had learned over years of friendship. Usually meant he was choosing his words more carefully than he let on. "Self-made," Theo said. "Well, inherited a failing freight company, rebuilt it from nothing. Brilliant, by all accounts. Private to the point of being a closed room." He paused. "Women find him compelling." "Theo, I'm just providing context." "Compile your context into a memo and send it to someone who asked," she said dryly. But she glanced back once, just once, at the end of the corridor where the courtroom doors still sat closed. Theo noticed. He always noticed, but he didn't say anything. He just wrapped both hands around his own coffee and looked at something else, and the expression that crossed his face as he did was one he had practiced enough to make invisible. He had always been in love with her, but never for once said it. He almost managed it. Evander called her office the next morning. Not his assistant to her assistant. Him. Directly. She picked up her own line at the second ring and heard his voice. That same unhurried register. And felt her spine do something it had no business doing at 9:15 on a Wednesday. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said without preamble. "Is that a question?" she asked. "A beat. Would you like to have dinner with me?" "Better," she said. But no. Okay, wait. Panic was almost in his voice. I would very much like to know you better. So, please? Much better, she said. Then, yes. She hung up and sat for a moment, looking at her phone. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the contract on her desk, and told herself it was just dinner. It was not just dinner. He chose somewhere quiet. He was already there when she arrived, which she noted because men like Evander Holt did not often arrive first. He stood when he saw her come through the door. That small thing did something to her she was not going to examine right now. They talked for 3 hours. He asked her about her cases. He asked her what it felt like to walk into a courtroom, knowing the odds were against her. She found herself telling him things she hadn't planned to tell him. About the case early in her career that she lost, and what it cost her. He listened to all of it. And then, quietly, he said, "People don't usually see what it takes, do they? They see the outcome and assume the armor comes with the territory." She looked at him across the table. "No," she said. "They don't." He was quiet for a moment, turning his glass slowly in his hand. "I know something about that," he said, and then did not elaborate. She didn't push, but she didn't forget it either. "I'd like to see you again," he said. She looked up at him for a moment, the way she looked at things in courtrooms when she was trying to understand what was actually being said beneath the words. "Call me," she said. She got in her car. She did not look back. She was lying to herself. She wanted to look back very badly. He called. And then he called again. And then there was a Thursday afternoon he appeared at her office building lobby with food, because she had mentioned in passing 3 days ago that she hadn't taken lunch in a week, and she had come down the elevator in her courtroom clothes, and found him standing there with takeout bags, looking slightly uncertain, and she had stared at him for a full 3 seconds before she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. His face changed when she laughed. Something in it broke open just slightly, and what came through was a warmth so unguarded that it almost took her breath away, because it was so completely different from every face he showed the world. "Billionaire delivering takeouts?" she teased. "Always at your service." He smiled with relief. "You remembered that." "I remember most things you say," he said simply, as if this were unremarkable. She took the food. They ate in her conference room with files stacked around them. It was unglamorous and strange, and she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so thoroughly, quietly happy in an ordinary moment. When he left, she stood at her window and watched him cross the street to his car. He moved through the city with the same stillness he carried everywhere. Unhurried, contained, like a man who had decided exactly how much of himself the world was entitled to. She stayed at the window longer than she had any reason to. She was falling in love with him. She knew it the way you know things you haven't quite decided to know yet, present but unacknowledged, waiting. Seraphine didn't celebrate her birthdays. She never had. Not in the way the world seemed to expect, the restaurant reservations, and the manufactured joy of it all. What she preferred, what she had always preferred, was a quiet evening and Theo. Every year without fail, Theo came. He always brought stargazer lilies because he had noticed, years ago, that she always slowed down when she passed them at the flower stall on her street. He never mentioned that he'd noticed. He just showed up with them. Every year, year after year. And she would hold them a moment too long before putting them in water, and that moment was the closest thing to hope he allowed himself. He left work early that evening, stopped at the stall, and stood outside her building with the lilies wrapped in brown paper and a feeling in his chest that was equal parts warmth and something he didn't let himself name. He called her. No answer. He tried the buzzer. Nothing. He stood on the pavement and looked up at her windows. Dark. He checked his watch, called again, stood there for a while, telling himself she was probably in the shower, probably had her phone on silent, probably any of 100 reasonable things. He sat on the low wall outside her building with the flowers across his knees, and he waited, because waiting for Seraphine was something Theo had become quietly expert at, in more ways than one. By 8 o'clock, the street had gone quieter, and the evening had gone cold, and Theo was still there. He heard the car before he saw it. A dark car, moving slowly, easing to the curb 20 feet from where he sat. The engine cut. The driver's door opened, and Theo watched Evander Holt come around the front of the car with the unhurried ease of a man who had made a decision and was simply following it through. Then the passenger door opened. Seraphine stepped out. She was in a dress Theo hadn't seen before. Deep burgundy, simple, the kind of thing she wore when she dressed for herself and not for a courtroom. Her hair was down, and she was laughing. Not the polite version, not the professional version. The real one, the one that started in her eyes before it reached her mouth. The one that Theo had spent years collecting like something rare. They couldn't see him because he had been sitting at the side, waiting. She was laughing at something Evander had said, and Evander was looking at her with an expression that Theo felt in his sternum, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. That look. He knew that look. He had felt that look from the inside for 6 years, and here it was on someone else's face. And it was the most efficiently devastating thing he had ever seen. They stopped at the building door. Evander said something low, private, meant only for her. She tilted her face up toward his, and Theo could not hear the words from where he sat, but he didn't need to. He could read the whole story in the angle of her face, in the way she didn't step back, in the way her hand rested against his arm like it already knew where it belonged. Theo did not move. He wasn't sure he was breathing. She went inside. Evander stood at that door for a moment after it closed. Just stood there, looking at the space she had occupied, with the face of a man quietly rearranged. Then he got back in the car. The engine turned over. The car pulled away. Theo looked down at the lilies in his lap. The brown paper. The careful knot he had tied without thinking. He walked back to his car and laid the flowers on the passenger seat, and looked at nothing in particular. The speech he had composed on the drive over. Feelings he'd been carrying in a closed room for 6 years, and tonight he had finally decided he was not an angry man. He had never been an angry man. But sitting in that car watching the dark above her windows, he was something he did not have a clean word for. And it was the particular humiliation of a man who has waited too long. He reached into the back seat for his laptop. He told himself it was concern. He told himself a man like Evander Holt, that private, that wealthy, with money that moved that quietly. A man like that deserved scrutiny. He told himself Seraphine was too close to this now, that someone needed to look clearly at what she was walking into, that this was about her safety and not about anything else. Then he opened the browser and started to dig. She was in her kitchen on a Sunday morning when her phone began vibrating in a way that meant something had happened. She picked it up and read the headline, and the words blurred and rearranged themselves, and she read it again. Billionaire Evander Holt connected to 5-year-old hit and run. Victim, Jason Reed, father of 2. Died at scene. She sat down, her coffee cooling in front of her. She sat there for a long time. Then she picked up her keys. His apartment was in a high-rise. The doorman called up. She waited. She had not called ahead. She had been afraid that if she gave him warning, he would find a way to be unreachable. He buzzed her up. He opened the door himself. And he looked at her with an expression that undid something in her chest even now. Even now, with the headline still burning behind her eyes. Because he looked like a man who had been expecting this moment. Who had known it was coming and had been dreading the walk toward it. She stepped inside. He closed the door. She stood in the middle of his living room. He stayed near the door, and the distance between them felt deliberate. "I've been sitting with this for hours," she said, "trying to find the version of this story where you are who I think you are." He said nothing. "And I keep finding it. I keep finding it, Evander, and that is what I need you to understand. I have looked at what they are printing about you, and I have looked at what I know about you, and they do not fit. They do not fit the same man." Something moved across his face. Not relief, something more complicated. "There is something you are not telling me." She took a step toward him. "I'm not asking you to tell me everything right now. I'm asking you to look me in the eyes and tell me there is more to this than what is on the front page of every newspaper this morning." He looked at her. His jaw was tight. His eyes, those careful, guarded eyes, were doing something she had never seen them do. They were fighting. "There is more," he said quietly. "But I cannot give it to you." "Cannot or will not?" "Both." She crossed the room and stood close enough that she had to look up at him, close enough to see the specific change in his breathing. "I don't believe you are a monster," she said. Her voice was low and entirely certain. "I need you to hear that. I have sat across from men who have done terrible things for terrible reasons, and I know what that looks like. It doesn't look like you." His expression shifted. Something fractured at the edges. "You don't know what I've done. I know you covered something up. I know a man died." She didn't flinch from it. "I also know that you are a man who remembers every single thing I say, who showed up at my office with food because I mentioned in passing that I hadn't eaten, who listens to me like what I'm saying is the only sound in the room." She held his gaze. "That is not the man on those front pages. And I don't know what the truth is yet, but I know there is one. And I know you are protecting it at a cost I don't think you are fully seeing." "You don't know what I'm protecting," he said. "No," she said quietly. "But I know it's going to destroy you. And I cannot." She stopped, steadied herself. "I will not stand here and watch that happen. Not after everything. Not after I've found someone I'm beginning to care about." The words landed between them like something physical. He went very still. "Seraphine," he said. Just her name, like it was all he had. "Whatever you are carrying," she said, "you do not have to carry it alone. I won't let you. I'm not built that way." Her eyes didn't leave his. "So please, get your lawyer. Let me do what I do." He raised his hand, and for a moment she thought he was going to touch her face. She thought it so completely that she held still. But his hand stopped, suspended between them, and then dropped back to his side. "I'm guilty," he said roughly, "so you don't need to do anything." "I won't believe that," she said softly. He looked at her, and in his eyes was everything he was not saying. Enormous and barely contained, and she felt the full weight of it like pressure against her sternum. Evander stood in his living room long after the sound of the elevator had gone. He stood at the window eventually. He looked at the city without seeing it. She had stood in his living room and looked at the worst version of what the world was saying about him, and said, "I don't believe you are a monster," with the complete certainty of someone stating something they had already proved to themselves. She had looked at him, and she had not looked away. "Not after I've found someone I'm beginning to care about. Not when that person is you." He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth. He had spent years building walls so thorough he had half convinced himself there was nothing left worth protecting on the other side of them. But he had not accounted for her. He had not accounted for what it would feel like to have someone stand in the middle of your worst moment and refuse to leave it. He picked up his phone, set it down, picked it up again. He called his lawyer, but long after that call ended, he was still standing at that window. He didn't sleep that night. She was a lawyer. So she pulled threads. She found the timeline first. Evander had been photographed at a fundraiser dinner the night of the accident. Time-stamped photos, 17 corroborating witnesses, a seating arrangement with his name on a placard. He had been 4 miles away when Jason Reed was struck. The mathematics were impossible. Someone else had been driving that car. She followed the money next. 3 shell companies, 1 financial transfer, 1 secondary account. And at the end of it, a name she hadn't expected and somehow, in the same breath had. Brett Holt. She sat with it. She thought about Evander's face when he'd said the word, please. She thought about a 34-year-old man who had been coaching youth soccer and driving home and had never arrived. She thought about 2 little girls who had been waiting for their father. She looked up Brett Holt's address. He answered the door like a man who had never once in his life faced a consequence he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. He was younger than Evander by several years and wore it the way some people wear borrowed clothes. Like the fit was close enough that he had stopped noticing it wasn't right. He looked at her and smiled the specific smile of someone who had decided she was not a threat. Let me guess, Brett said. My brother's lawyer girlfriend. Impressive. He always did have taste. You were driving, Seraphine said. She hadn't been invited in. She was speaking from the doorway. November 14th, 5 years ago. You hit Jason Reed. You left him on the side of that road and drove away. And your brother has been carrying what you did ever since. The smile stayed on Brett's face, but something changed behind it. Something narrowed. That's a very creative story, he said. I have the transfer records. I have the phone logs from that night. I have a witness who is no longer in your brother's pay. She held his gaze. I also have 2 daughters of Jason Reed's, who are now 8 and 11 years old. The older one started having panic attacks last year. Did you know that? About the daughters? Something crossed Brett's face. So quickly she might have missed it. Not remorse. Something that had started to be remorse a long time ago, and had been pressed down so often it had calcified into something uglier. My brother made his choices, Brett said. That's on him. Your brother was at a dinner across the city when you hit that man, she said quietly. He chose to protect you, and you let him. For 5 years, you let him. Evander has always loved playing the martyr. Brett smiled again. It didn't reach his eyes and hadn't for some time. He's very good at it. It makes him feel superior. Seraphine looked at him for a long, still moment. I want you to look me in the eyes, she said, and tell me that is what you actually believe. That the man who has been bleeding to keep you out of prison for 5 years did it to feel superior. Brett said nothing. He looked away first. The district attorney will be in touch, Seraphine said. I advise you cooperate. It will go better if you cooperate. She turned and walked to the elevator. Behind her, she heard Brett's door close. Not a slam. Just a click. The small, precise sound of a man sealing himself inside a life he had made, and was finally, irreversibly, going to have to live in. Seraphine pressed the elevator button. Her hands were perfectly still. Her heart was in pieces. Brett Holt was arrested on a Wednesday. Evander was released the following afternoon, the charges against him restructured. Obstruction of justice, evidence tampering. Serious. But not manslaughter. Not the death itself. That belonged to Brett now, and Brett alone. He called her the night he was released. She picked up before the second ring. She had been sitting with her phone in her hand for 3 hours. You did this, he said. Yes. You went to the district attorney. Yes, Evander. I asked you. His voice cracked on the word. She heard him pull it back together. I asked you to leave it alone. You asked me to watch you go to prison for something you didn't do. That was my choice." The words came out sharp and stripped of all the careful control she knew. "He is my brother, Seraphine. Do you understand what that means? He is my brother, and you went behind my back, and now he is." He stopped. She heard him breathe. "He is in handcuffs," Evander said, and the quiet of it was worse than the sharpness. "Because of you." "He is in handcuffs," she said steadily, "because he got behind the wheel drunk and killed a man, and then let you spend 5 years absorbing the consequences. I did not do that to him. He did that to himself. You had no right. I had every right. You were going to let yourself disappear into a prison cell for someone who would not lose a night's sleep over yours. Don't tell me what he would or wouldn't do. You don't know him." "I know what I saw when I sat across from him," she said. "I know what a man looks like when he feels nothing. And I know what you look like. I know what it cost you every day, what it has been costing you. Stop." His voice shook. "Stop acting like you understand this. You came into my life and you—" He cut himself off. She heard him exhale, long and fractured. "You made me want things. Things I had stopped giving myself permission to want. And I was already too far gone before I realized it. And now everything I was trying to protect is gone. And you are the reason. Evander. I know it wasn't simple." His voice dropped to something raw and terrible. "I know why you did it. I know it wasn't cruelty. I know that." A pause. "And I still cannot. I cannot look at this right now without—" He went quiet. The silence was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "Evander," she said softly, "please don't do this. Please just let me." "God." The word came out like something broken. "God, I wish I could hate you right now, Seraphine." The line went dead. She sat completely still with the phone in her lap. She called back. 6 rings. Voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sat for a moment, then stood, grabbed her keys, and drove to his building. The doorman called up. She stood in the marble lobby and watched his face as he listened and read the answer in the careful way he set the phone down. "Mr. Holt asks that you—" "I heard," she said quietly. She stood there for a moment, looking at the elevator doors. She thought about pushing. She was good at pushing. It was her greatest and most practiced skill. But she thought about his voice on that call, the way it had sounded when it broke. The difference between a man who had stopped loving her and a man who was in too much pain to be reached right now, and how clearly she could tell those two things apart. She left. She tried the next morning. Voicemail. She sent a message. Read receipt, no reply. She went to his office on the 3rd day, and his assistant met her at reception with genuine personal anguish and said very quietly that Mr. Holt had asked to be given time. Seraphine stood in that lobby with her jaw set and her eyes bright, and the expression she wore when a ruling had gone against her. Absorbing, deciding, not breaking. She went back to her office. She did not try again. She told herself she meant what she'd done. Every word of it. She would not perform regret to make his grief more manageable. She left. She tried the next morning. Voicemail. She sent a message. Read receipt. No reply. She went to his office on the 3rd day, and his assistant met her at reception with genuine personal anguish and said very quietly that Mr. Holt had asked to be given time. Seraphine stood in that lobby with her jaw set and her eyes bright and the expression she wore when a ruling had gone against her. Absorbing, deciding, not breaking. She went back to her office. She did not try again. She told herself she meant what she'd done. Every word of it. She would not perform regret to make his grief more manageable. But at night, in her apartment, She thought about the way his voice had sounded when he said, "I wish I could hate you right now." The specific agony of it, the love underneath the anger, and she felt it lodge in her chest and stay there. She missed him so much it felt structural, like something had been removed that her whole self had quietly built itself around. But she did not reach out anymore. She waited. 3 weeks. She ran in the mornings with the specific grim commitment of a woman converting grief into something the body could process. She was excellent at her job. She ate, mostly. She came home each evening to an apartment that had developed the particular quality of spaces that are quietly waiting for someone who hasn't come back yet. On a Friday night, she fell asleep on her sofa with a case file open on her chest, and woke at past 11 to knocking at her door. She lay still for a moment, oriented herself to the dark room, the file sliding to the floor. The knocking came again. Not loud, almost hesitant. She opened the door. Evander stood in the hallway and he was not right. His tie was gone, his shirt open at the collar, his hair not the way it was supposed to be. His eyes were red at the rims, and he smelled of whiskey and night air, and something that had been held in for a very long time and had finally stopped being able to stay in. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I didn't mean to come," he said. His voice was blurred at the edges, imprecise in a way she had never once heard from him. "I told myself I wasn't. I walked for 2 hours. Maybe more. I don't actually know. I kept walking and I ended up." He looked at her door. "Here." She stepped back. He came in. He moved through her apartment slowly and stopped in the middle of the living room and turned to face her, and everything was on his face. All of it. Everything he kept behind glass for the entire world, including her, was spilling. "I've been so angry at you," he said. "I have tried so hard to stay angry because the anger is easier than the other thing. You understand. It's so much easier. But I can't." He pressed his hand over his eyes. "Every time I get there, I think about the way you looked at me in my apartment. The things you said. And I can't." He moved to the window, turned back. "I think about Brett," he said, different now, the track shifting. "I think about him at 16 in our father's house being told every day, without a single word being used, that he wasn't the right one. And I made a decision. I decided I could fix that. I decided if I stayed close enough and gave enough and kept him safe enough, he'd love you for it," she said quietly. He stopped, looked at her. "Yes," he said. She crossed the room. She put her hand on his arm. "Come and sit down," she said gently. He sat where she guided him, on the sofa, without resistance, and she went to the kitchen and put on the kettle and brought back honey water, warm enough to hold, and pressed it into both his hands. "Drink," she said. He drank. His hands were not entirely steady. She sat beside him and said nothing, and let him come back to himself by degrees. The whiskey haze thinning, the frantic energy settling, the words running down. His head tipped back against the cushions. His eyes closed. After a while, his breathing went slow and even, and she thought he was asleep. She gathered the case file from the floor. She picked up the blanket from the armchair and laid it over him with the particular care of someone trying not to disturb something fragile. She stood, turned to go. His hand closed around her wrist. She went still. "Don't," he said. His voice was quiet and clear. The whiskey had burned through to something underneath, something more sober and more honest than anything she had heard from him all night. "Don't go yet. Please." She turned around. He was looking up at her. His eyes were tired and direct and entirely without armor. She sat back down, close this time. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the call. for not opening the door, for making you feel like what you did for me was something wrong. His jaw worked. You saved me. I rang you and said terrible things, and you still came when I knocked on your door at 11 at night, and He exhaled slowly. I don't have language for what that makes you to me. Tell me about Brett, she said softly. Not the night before. Tell me how it started. He was quiet for a long time. The apartment was still around them. I was 19, he said finally. Brett was 16. Our father had already made up his mind about which of us was worth building. Brett always knew. You could see it in him, this slow, constant damage. And I thought if I could just fill the gap, if I could be enough for both of them, if I made myself big enough, he'd feel safer. He paused. I thought eventually he'd love me for it. He didn't, she said gently. No. He looked down at his hands. I sat across from myself in that prison holding room, and I finally looked at 20 years of doing everything for a man who has never once looked back. And I don't know what to do with that. I don't know who I am without it. Without the managing, the covering, the fixing. If I'm not doing that, I don't know what's left. She took his hand. She held it properly, both of hers around his. And I am right here. I have been right here. And I am not going anywhere. I decided that a long time ago, and there is nothing you could say or do that would make me undecided. His eyes were bright. He looked at her for a long moment. The long, careful look of a man who has been told something enormous and is trying to make himself believe it. Then he reached up and touched her face. His thumb against her cheek, barely there, just resting. His eyes closed for a moment the way they do when something is almost too much to receive. I don't deserve you, he said. You deserve, she said quietly, someone who refuses to let you disappear. Lucky for you. That is my most practiced and deeply held skill. Something in his face unlocked. He was asleep within minutes, her hand still held loosely in his. She didn't leave. She turned off the lamp and sat in the armchair across the room, in the dark. And she watched him sleep with the quiet expression of a woman who has made a decision she is entirely at peace with. She thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that she would do absolutely anything to keep him safe. The trial came 8 months later. Brett Holt received 7 years. Vehicular manslaughter. Leaving the scene of a fatal accident. Obstruction. He sat through the proceedings with the affect of a man who had already decided that the world's opinion of him was not a currency he intended to deal in. He did not look at Evander once. Evander sat in the gallery with his hands folded in his lap and his face composed in that way he had. That careful stillness. But she was beside him. She had been beside him through every hearing, every deposition, every ugly procedural morning. She watched him when the verdict was read, watched his profile, watched the particular way his eyes closed for exactly 3 seconds and then opened again. He didn't cry. He didn't look relieved. He looked like a man receiving news about a grief he had already lived through. She found his hand. He turned his palm up and held hers. They sat like that until the room emptied. I owe you an apology, he said. It was 2 weeks after the trial that Theo asked her to coffee. She chose a small cafe in her neighborhood, and Theo was already there when she arrived. He stood when he saw her, which he had always done, and she felt the familiar warmth of him, and underneath it, the complicated, careful sadness of knowing that warmth had always meant more to him than it had to her. They sat and ordered. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at her the way she had sometimes caught him looking. Directly, without his usual buffer of ease and humor. Open in a way that cost him something. She waited. I found the evidence, and I went to a journalist. He looked down at his mug. I told myself I was protecting you, and there was truth in that. Some truth. But there was also… He exhaled, looked up. I watched you fall in love with him, Siri. I watched it happen and I couldn't. I didn't handle it. I handled it badly. I did something from a place I'm not proud of. And it put you and Evander through things that were mine to own, and not yours to carry. The calf sounds moved gently around them. Seraphine held his gaze. Theo, she said carefully. How long? He smiled. It was a sad smile and a real one. 6 years, he said. She felt the breath move out of her quietly. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid, he said simply. And then I waited too long. And then you found him, and I… He stopped. Set down his mug. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to have the truth from me because you have always deserved the truth from me, and I've been owing it to you. She was quiet for a moment. He has my heart, she said finally, because she thought Theo deserved that honesty, even if it cost something. He's had it for a while now. I know, Theo said. I've known since the day in the corridor. When you looked back, she had not known he had seen that. Something ached, quietly, in her chest. She couldn't be angry with him. Not really. She loves him too, not just the way he had always wanted. Are you going to be okay? She asked. I think I need some time, he said. Some space to figure out what I actually want once I stop building it around you. He looked at her across the table, and his eyes were clear and sad and decided. But I'll be okay, Sari. I'm going to be okay. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He looked down at it, and something passed across his face, tender and final, and almost peaceful. He left first. She sat with her coffee and watched him through the window. Shoulders square, hands in his pockets, walking into whatever was next for him, with the quiet determination of a man who had finally put down a weight he'd been carrying in secret. She hoped, fiercely and simply, that he would find it. The love that was actually his. The life that fit him properly. She finished her coffee. Then she went home. 3 months after the trial closed, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, Seraphine came home to the smell of something cooking. She stopped in the doorway. Evander was at her stove. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, his back to her, doing something that looked considerably more intentional than anything she had ever attempted in this kitchen. He hadn't heard her come in. She stood there and looked at him. At this man in her kitchen on a Tuesday. At the specificity of him. The way he stood. The way he had learned where everything was without being shown. The way he had slowly, quietly, without announcement, made himself at home in her life. The way she had not known she was waiting for someone to do. He turned. His face did the thing. That opening, that warmth the world never got to see. You're early, he said. You're in my kitchen, she said. Using my pants. Someone has to. You own 4 pans and have complicated feelings about all of them, and use none of them. She set her bag down and walked toward him, and he turned from the stove, and she came to stand in front of him, and she looked up at him with everything in her face. No courtroom composure, no careful management. Just all of it, open and unguarded and entirely his. What? He said softly. I can't stop thinking about you, she said. He went still. From the moment I wake up, you are the first thing. Every morning, before I've even fully decided to be awake, I have tried to be sensible about it. I have reminded myself that I am a rational person who does not make decisions based on… Seraphine, I'm telling you something. I know you are, he said, and his voice had gone low and quiet. I know. Keep going. She looked at him. You became my world, she said. I don't know how. I was paying attention, and it happened anyway. And I have been walking around for months, trying to figure out how a person tells another person that everything shifted. That there was before, and now there is after, and the after has your name on it. He stepped toward her. You want to know something, he said quietly. I sat in a courtroom while my brother was sentenced. The worst day of my life, arguably. And the only clear thing, the only thing I could feel with any certainty, was that you were beside me, that your hand was in mine, that the whole terrible machinery of that day was survivable because you were in the room. His eyes didn't leave hers. That is not something I have words adequate for, Seraphine. Her eyes were bright. My heart belongs to you, he said simply. I don't know how else to say it. He took her hands, both of them, held them. I belong to you entirely. That used to scare me, but I am completely done being scared of it. She stared at him. He raised an eyebrow, a glint of something warm and slightly wicked at the edge of it. So, he said with great seriousness, given that I am now entirely and irreversibly yours, I would very much like to know, how exactly do you intend to take care of me? She blinked. Then she laughed. A full, real, completely helpless laugh. And she stepped into him, and his arms came around her immediately, like they had been waiting, like this was where they had always been pointed, and she pressed her face against his chest and felt his laugh low and quiet against her ear. Very badly, she said into his shirt. I should warn you now. I am going to take care of you extremely badly. I'll take my chances, he said. He held her tighter. Outside her kitchen window, the city went on. Indifferent, unhurried, entirely unaware that inside this apartment on this ordinary Tuesday evening, two people who had been through fire had arrived, simply and without ceremony, at something that felt like home. They married on a Saturday in October, in a ceremony small enough to mean something. A year and a half later, Seraphine Caldwell Holt stood in a courtroom 7 months pregnant, and she was magnificent. She carried it the way she carried everything, with complete composure, total authority, and absolutely no concessions to the fact that she was doing something extraordinary. From the back of the courtroom, Evander watched. He sat in the last row with his arms folded and watched his wife dismantle a witness, twice her size, with 4 questions and 1 silence that lasted exactly long enough. He watched her turn to face the jury with that look, the one he had first seen across a courtroom the first day he saw her, composed, certain, luminous with conviction. She found him in the corridor after, still in her courtroom face, files under one arm, moving like a woman with 17 things still to do today. How was it? She asked, without breaking stride. You know how it was, he said, falling into step beside her. I want to hear you say it. He stopped walking. She stopped too, and turned, and looked at him. Slightly impatient, entirely beautiful, 7 months along, and still the most formidable person in any building she entered. Extraordinary, he said. You were extraordinary. She tried not to smile. She did not entirely succeed. He took her bag from her without asking, and offered his arm, and she took it. And they walked out of the courthouse and into the afternoon together. Unhurried, certain, his hand warm and steady over hers. He had spent his whole life being strong for people who took it for granted. She had spent hers fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Neither of them had known, walking into each other's lives, that the thing they had been quietly starving for was exactly this. Someone to stand beside who would not let them stand alone. They had found it. They were keeping it,